It is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. I'm Dr. Grantham Taylor Hughes from my show, The Grantham Taylor Hughes Show, with my guest host, Lena Suzanne. Lena, how are you, dear?
I'm well, thank you, Grantham. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's a great day out here. It's sunny and warm, even though it's 6 in the morning and the sun's not out.
We've got a sunny day here too. It's really nice.
Oh, you have a sunny day? Yeah, but
Yes.
you're 5 hours earlier in Great Britain, and I'm in America. I'm in a city near Philadelphia called Greenville. Down the street from me is Joe Biden. I wave to him every morning. Hi, Joe. How are you doing? As he goes out to the front of his house and gets his newspaper. So you got to appreciate. I catch him in his bathrobe going to get his newspaper. Joe, get back in there. I can take pictures. You see how it is, Lena. You get on the shows and it just takes off, right? On its own. Anyway, so I'm gonna give some background to myself and Lena can talk a little bit about herself. I'll go first. I have a PhD in English Common Law, ironically from California University. I get English Common Law in America. So you got to appreciate the irony of that. And you wonder, okay, that's really great. Anyway, so my family is the Bauer-Rothschilds. Let's get that straight. The Bauer-Rothschilds, not the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds married into the family during the medieval times, during the around the 15th century. And so it was the Bauers way ahead of that. The Bauer family was notorious for, well, actually famous, really, not really infamous or notorious, because my great grandfather, or great even more than that, goes back to King Friedrich Bauer, who did a fidelity ceremony with Henry II Plantagenet. And the reason for that being very important, and that's part of what we'll talk about today, is that was the first fidelity ceremony and the only one that was necessary to happen to create an international foundation called the Bauer Foundation. Now, in that foundation, okay, well, let me introduce you and you talk a little about yourself. I told everybody I'm part of the Bauer-Rothschilds. We do control the top bank in the world today, but we really don't have direct affiliation with the Rothschilds. I want to make sure that's clear so don't people won't think I'm some kind of sinister character. Anyway, so go ahead, Lena. You can talk a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Grantham. So I live in England and I became friends with Grantham maybe about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I
And
think so.
yeah, and so he's got lots of interesting things to say. So I'm learning from him. And we've decided to do this little podcast together for YouTube.
Hmm.
I don't have any affiliations with banking families or the rich and famous. I don't know Joe Biden.
Not yet.
No. So that's me.
Okay, that's her. Well, thanks, Lena. I appreciate that. So we'll dive into this whole thing. I started talking about what, excuse me, what is known as a fidelity ceremony, which is really important because all it is two people come together and it's called sight recognition. Now, the my great my predecessor, my family member there, my relationship with him, he was what was known as the creator in the foundation, and all that meant was he created a certificate which was called the trust certificate. He created that certificate and then sold it to Henry II for an apple or a banana or something. See, there was some sort of exchange with the he's called the exchanger grantor. Okay, now the exchanger grantor, he pays for the certificate, which is really important because now he has the certificate in hand. In other words, he's holding the certificate. The reason why that's important because now he becomes the wielder of the law because the trust certificate was really the first medium of exchange. It was the first money that was created by my my ancestor. I got the term right this time. I was fishing for the anyway, so it was created by my ancestor and just a document. It's a piece of paper. So to be clear on this, the site recognition between two people had to be documented in history in what was known as originally it was called a tryst certificate because tryst means coming together in sight recognition. Tryst usually has a romantic connotation to it, meaning that there's a man and woman come together in a tryst, right? But in reality, the origin of the word trust is tryst. It means just somebody coming together and seeing each other in sight recognition. So the recognition is very important because now you're seeing another person as a human and you're a human, and there's a duplicity, a duplication of your humanity. So if you have any questions with this, Lena, just jump in there because all it is it's the simplicity of things. We got to keep things simple. And I try to do that, but then some people say it gets too complex and all that business. But we can't be concerned with that whole thing. The idea is to keep things simple. So the inaugural interaction between my ancestor and King Henry created the foundation that controls the world right now. See, that's why it's relevant and timely because the Bauer Foundation is in control of pretty much everything. It controls it's the basic documentation, provisional law for the world of contracts law. See, because we're in a documented world. So it's kind of like, Lena, you have a driver's license, right?
Hmm.
Okay, and you have a birth certificate, correct?
I do.
Okay, but you probably never have looked at the whole thing, just like you use pound sterling, and on the face of the pound sterling, it's really an IOU. It's a promise to pay. You probably didn't really know that. You didn't know it was a promissory note, right?
Never really looked, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, there you go. I didn't bring any money with me. I was going to show the dollar bill, but I didn't bring one with me. So that means I have Hoover flags. Anyway, and back in the day in 1930, if you pulled your pocket out of your pants and showed this little pocket in the wrong direction, they called that a Hoover flag, meaning you didn't have any money. Anyway, so
Can we
so
go?
the
Sorry, can I
yeah, go
interrupt
ahead,
a minute?
please. Yeah.
So you say, Grantham, that the Bauer Foundation were the creators of the provisions. What do you mean by that? Is this some kind of document or rule or something?
Yes, that's a good question because the trust certificate um, was a prelude to creating a foundation document. In other words, there was some explanation for what the certificate represented and the interaction between the two, the fidelity ceremony. So the provisions are just explaining the certificate. See that's what they're about. That's the only reason why I have provisions for the explanation of what you're going to do. In other words, if we were to make provisions of our talk here, we put it in documentation, that would be like a recording or a written down version of what we did here. See, so all the documentation and the foundation paperwork or the contract that's made is based upon explaining the certificate. What is it about the certificate? Mainly, as I said before, it was an exchange between two people that documented an interaction between two people. That's all it is. It's a documentation of an interaction. It would be like in the old days when you had a phone call. After you made a phone call, you document the phone call and send a document to each participant. Now they have emails and texting and things of that nature. Same idea. When you email, it's still electronic, but in the old days, hard copy was really important. See, so the idea of the recognition and the foundation provisions means it's just a documentation to explain the certificate on the frontispiece of the certificate of the exchange between the two parties. You have a receiver and a sender. A sender and receiver are a creator and exchanger grantor in this case. You have one individual that's a creator, and the second individual is an exchanger slash grantor. See, he has two hats. The reason for that is in the fidelity ceremony, he's the exchanger. He's now holding the certificate. And then once he becomes the exchanger, the slash grantor, now he can grant the law through the certificate. He has a certification of law to be able to grant other provisional documents and licenses to people, like sovereignty certificates, government licenses. All these things are now wielded by the holder of the document, and that was King Henry II. See, now you can realize even today, Richard King Richard III is the holder of this document. He's exchanger grantor in the Bauer Foundation, which I write the provisions to. I've written the last two provisions in the last 40 years, and that foundation controls everything.
Sorry, Grantham, you said King Henry, but then you also mentioned King Richard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Richard III, I think is what his number is. But Henry II was back in the 12th century, 1148 BC, ACE.
So
Okay.
Where does Charles come into this?
Well, Charles, down through the ages, that's a good question. Down through the ages, it has carried over being this exchanger grantor, being the grantor of the law. See, he being the King of England is still the grantor of the law in the Bauer Foundation. Now, it really doesn't have anything to do with the countries because we're under the United Nations. So, the United Nations is the one government right now, the one world government, but he's still the grantor of the law. But the thing is, he doesn't really know it right now. He doesn't really understand it. That's why I'm the voice of all this to explain it. And I was the voice back in 2006 because I was to explain these things and get a proper perspective on the whole thing. And it doesn't really matter whether they're aware of it or not. It's just the way things are. You see, that's the way it's set up, and you can challenge things with the knowledge, but it's hard to do because the court system's set up under Uniform Commercial Code, but they're in denial of that. See, that they don't want to talk about it because that leads to my platform that I started in 2006 with the international bankruptcy of 1930 at the Geneva Convention. That's when I started out in 2006. I was talking about the world bankruptcy. And see, all this leads up to the bankruptcy because now there's no certificate of money. It's called a Federal Reserve note. You see, so this segues, Lena, into our present day bankruptcy that we're in, which was started by the two kings back in the 12th century. See, that's why this is clear and very important sequence that's taken place up until now. See, so we're yeah, go ahead, please.
But can you explain to us how we got? First of all, I just wanted to ask, so over time, has anyone really known about this fidelity ceremony, or is this all new information that you're talking about, just this in the last 20 years or something?
Right. See, that's a good point. But the scholars knew about the fidelity ceremony because when they taught it in the classroom, but they glossed over it. They didn't see the importance of it. So my family was saying, you got to get in there and explain the importance of the fidelity ceremony. So that's when I took off in 2006 to explain this very important documentation because they were pushing past it and not really putting attention on it. But it's a real critical mass for right now to understand why we're in a bankruptcy. And then you said in the past, well, what's the point of it? Because we can still spend the money. You see what I mean? But then see, the knowledge is what's important. The knowingness is important, not the practice. I've tried to explain for years that remember, I give you knowledge, but you might not be able to implement it, which is okay because knowing is everything. Everybody seeks knowledge. Every single individual that's listening to this call, ourselves included, we're all seeking knowledge. And that's the important part, to know and not necessarily apply. I mean, it's a nice idea if you can apply it. And I'm always saying good work if you can apply it, but it's hard in our world today because the systems are such in denial. It doesn't mean that the systems aren't good. They just need to not be in denial. And that's why we move forward into higher eras when they might be able to apply certain things. But right now, we'll stay on the subject today of where we are now in terms. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so can you help me understand how we got from the fidelity ceremony, that first medium
Yes,
of exchange, that certificate that was given that was a medium of exchange? How did we get from that to having money and then to being in a bankruptcy?
absolutely. Well, the original certificate would be considered credit worthy. It'd be a credit because he paid something for the certificate. So that was the first credit exchange. But then later on, see, when they got into banking, they realized that when you get into a major collective, a lot of people, that the math breaks down. See, you and I can add 1 + 1 is 2, but you get 10 people there, and you might get one or two that will declare it 1 + 1 is 3. See, so the math is an individual science, but not a collective science. And that was proven up in the 1930 Geneva Convention Bankruptcy when the bankers just threw up their hands like this, demonstrating what the bankers did. They threw up their hands and gave up on trying to maintain, they call it banking equilibrium, balance of accounts. They just couldn't do it because it's not possible. So even to this day, we're in a bankruptcy because we can't really measure it. Measuring things down to the nth degree, as you know, there's no absolute zero, so you can't really measure things exactly, and that becomes the problem. Math is the problem. And then you say, well, what do we do about that? Well, we need to take out the medium of exchange and get back to indirect trade like the American tribes had before they're they're westernized by the Europeans that came in and created the money. They created the money, and it became a big issue at that point. Before that, they had indirect trade. Indirect trade meant that the Iroquoians could go to their wigwams and get anything they needed in terms of food, shelter, and clothing. See, so that's an economic process that we can get to very easily, but we're not there yet. It won't be there for a long time because the bankers are insisting on the money, and in the marketplace, they think of the medium of exchange, but really it's not really a high economic cycle at all. The high economic cycle is indirect trade, but we're not near that yet. See, we aren't going. I was talking about this years ago, excuse me, on a Blog Talk radio show, but it was Vivica Gresham, and she was interviewing me back in, how long ago that was, 18 years ago, and she got really intrigued by indirect trade. And indirect trade is really the high economic cycle of having no money in between the exchange of goods and services. You see, but we're not near that yet. We're not even close to doing that. But at least I'm giving that knowledge. So what happened over the course of time? That credit system failed because the mathematics couldn't maintain banking equilibrium, and they had to declare a bankruptcy. But it's not this. It hasn't. It's happened many times before, the declaration of bankruptcy, and they still do subroutines of bankruptcies now, but they don't really hold water because the one that's staying in force right now is the one from 1930. That's still in force and still timely today.
So Grantham, when you say they couldn't maintain banking equilibrium, do you mean that they just couldn't keep track of how much money was coming in and out
That's right.
because there was so much?
Yes, they couldn't keep balance of accounts, and they make money as we speak. The coinage engraving in Washington D.C., the coinage engraving building, they're turning out millions and millions of dollars every single day, paper, and they have big I don't know if they're Heidelberg anymore. They might be Heidelberg presses, but they have these presses that they churn out the money constantly, and they can't keep track of it. That's the problem. That's why they can't keep banking equilibrium, because they can't keep track of the whole thing. You see what I mean? So that's why it becomes a huge problem when you start getting these enormous amounts of numbers and then trying to maintain it down to the penny. So you can't do it. It's not possible. So that's why we've been in a bankruptcy for a long time, since it's been a while, since
Well,
1930. Yes, go ahead.
and so when the bankers threw up their hands, how did we then get to a bankruptcy? What happened to make it a bankruptcy?
Well, they turned it into debt currency. In other words, before 1930, they had what was known as a silver certificate. And the certificate was a banner. Next time, next show on, I'll show I'll bring a dollar and show the top of the dollar bill. It says Federal Reserve note on the top. And it used to say, that banner used to say silver certificate. And so they took out that banner and put in the Federal Reserve note. Now, before 1945, they have what is known as the international peg system, which is a trade demarcation for the top 12 banks to do bank trading. And that means that all the money has to go into that particular peg. So in 1945 and before, it used to be pound sterling was the international peg for the top 12 banks to trade was the pound sterling. But after World War II and then after the bankruptcy, George VI divined, it was very important, not to deface the pound sterling with the Federal Reserve note banner at the top. So instead, he instituted the peg as the US dollar. United States dollar became the peg, and then they defaced the dollar bill from silver certificate to Federal Reserve note. So this might sound, we can go over this many times in future shows and whatnot, because it may sound a little complex at first, but it really isn't. It's really simple. When you realize that the dollar bill is now the Federal Reserve note and it's a peg system for trading, that means all country currencies have to turn into the US dollar to be traded in the top 12 banks in the world. You see?
Okay.
Yes.
Can I just ask what do you mean by Federal Reserve? What's that?
Okay, good. The Federal Reserve System is an international system, and there's 12 banks called the Federal Reserve Banks. They were instituted in 1910 to make the world rich by using an exemption account for each person. That means when a person is born and they're issued a birth certificate, that birth certificate is monetized by what the price of gold is on that particular day. So when they monetize the birth certificate, now they trade that certificate on the market and then pay you a commission on the principal. Now, people were trying to, back maybe about 10 years ago, there was a group on the internet that were trying to get their birth certificate back. And I had to get in there and explain to them, no, you don't want to do that. It's not a sinistral thing. The Federal Reserve initially, and they're government banks. They're not private banks. They're not the top 12 banks like Barclays, a private bank, have nothing to do with the Federal Reserve System. They're government banks that were trying to make the populace rich by paying this huge commission every year. And the way you can prove that, if you go to drop menus, anybody, and check out any type of government, when you get back money from the government, I forgot the term. Anyway, so when you get back a government return, say on a tax return and what have you,
Yeah.
if you look at the very top of that document, there'll be a big balance number. There'll be a huge number. It goes up to 10 to the ninth, which is a billion. And each year you're paid $1 billion commission, but you didn't know that, see, because they're trading the birth certificate, making trillions on your birth certificate. And see, this group was trying to get that back. I said, no, you don't want to do that. You want to allow them to trade so you can get your commission each year. So I had to get in there and explain it. See, I'm really good at explaining the details in this. And so that's called the exemption account, that each individual with a Social Security number, and even in Great Britain, you can get a Social Security number in a Federal Reserve Bank. You can go to your account, your Social Security account, and get that commission each year, but we don't do that, see, because they're not aware of that too as we speak. And that's called the exemption account. But what they do with that $1 billion each year, they roll it over into a going concern in your name. There's a company in your name that's traded on the market, and they trade your birth certificate, making billions and billions of dollars. But see, they were willing to pay a commission to each individual. But see, this got lost over 18 generations because they started in 1910, and it totally got lost. So this was resurrected about 10 years ago, talking about the exemption account. I've been talking about it for a long time. And so I had to be the voice of clarity on that one too.
So Grantham, at some point, were they willing this money that so they use our birth certificate, right? And they're making money on it. And
Yes, yes.
originally, were they going to give us individually the money?
They were going to give the commission. So they're trading the birth certificate, and that's the principal. Whatever they get, they were going to pay you this commission each year. And they do pay you every year, but you don't know it, see? And
What?
they've forgotten it too. Yeah, go ahead.
So you say they pay us every year, but we don't know it. So I'm not benefiting from it. How can I
No,
get
you're
how
not
can I
benefiting.
get how can I get this
Well, see,
money?
that's what we were trying to do that on our conference calls. We were trying to get a withdrawal slip made. We just not couldn't get it fixed. See, it's like an entity. We were trying to create a withdrawal slip that you could go to your bank and get your $1 billion. but we never got that accomplished. See, that's still a possibility, but see, they're not acknowledging it. See, the bankers don't understand it. See, again, if you don't have knowledge, you don't have a concept or anything, how can you apply it? See, and that's the problem. So I give this knowledge, and the application of it is that the systems don't understand it. But it doesn't make it any less true that it is. See, I'm the voice of truth, and people appreciate that. They can understand that what we do here is probably the only truth in the whole world, which is really sad when you think about it. So this doesn't mean the system doesn't exist. That was what they did a long time ago, and I'm very aware of it. So we can bring this awareness to people, but then you don't have a withdrawal slip that they'll accept. See, they won't accept the withdrawal slip because they don't know what you're talking about, and you barely know what you're talking about. So it's one of these things where if you don't have a concept, you can't apply anything. But it doesn't mean it's less true. Another it doesn't mean it's not the truth in the matter. Just like like I said, when I give out the truth, you won't necessarily be able to apply it. And just like the Uniform Commercial Code, people were very upset with me about that because they thought they'd go into courtrooms and beat the judge and win in court cases, but they didn't acknowledge its existence. See, because if you acknowledge the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, that means you're acknowledging the bankruptcy. And they didn't want to do that in the day, and they still don't want to do that. But that doesn't mean they won't at some point. So people can keep on these things until they can succeed. But it's just like us trying to get our podcasts that go viral and what have you. In order for that to succeed, we got to make a connection, right?
Yeah. So Grantham, for the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes, um, can we go back to the bankruptcy? And so how is it that we can, even though we're in a bankruptcy, we still use money and everything still works fine? We're not really
Okay.
aware of it.
Right. It's being unaware of it, and you can still take money in and buy a loaf of bread. You see what I
Mhm.
mean? And they'll take the money, but it's all IOUs. The truth be known, they're promised to pay. In other words, if you get the money to buy a loaf of bread from the baker, you get the baker the money, right? Now he has an IOU, and you're promising to pay him the certificate later, but you never do. But he's not aware of it, you're not aware of it. But the truth be known, that's a tort violation. See, if the government became aware of that, that's a civil offense, you see, in terms of, it's called a tort, civil violations, a T-O-R-T, a tort. You see what I mean? But they're not aware of it. See, they're not aware they can charge you with tort violations, and the baker doesn't know about it. So they accept the money because it's a normal practice. It's like what we put in practice doesn't mean necessarily true. You see,
Mhm.
we have to be the voice of reason here. We have to get, if we're going to use logic, and when we'll get into the native language eventually on the calls, if we're going to use logic, it better be pristine. See, so what I talk about is pristine, but sometimes Lena people don't understand it because I might be talking too fast, so they don't get it, whatever. But it doesn't make it any less true. You see how it is? When
Mhm.
people condemn me or whatever, they can condemn me all day long. Remember, I told you about the lady that got up in one of my lectures a long time ago, and she said, I haven't agreed with anything you said in the last half hour. I said, that's okay. I don't either. That's probably good to stop on. We're getting close to the end. I'm pretty sure we are.
We are, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple of
That's
minutes
probably
now.
that's probably a good note to stop on. Stop there, right?
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you, Grantham. And there's lots of things we can revisit in there. Um,
Okay, and we'll see you in the next couple days. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Fairly well.